Hello, I'm Kathleen Newman from Maine Historical Society. Thank you for joining us for another virtual program. It is February 18th, 2021, and this is a book talk on True North with Kathryn Olmstead. Kathryn Olmstead co-founded Echoes with Gordon Hammond in 1988 and oversaw the magazine for its entire 117-issue run. She is a former Bangor Daily News columnist, prior editor of the Aroostook Republican, and served on the University of Maine journalism faculty for 25 years, the last 6 as the dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. In addition to True North, she is the author of Flight to Freedom, World War II Through the Eyes of a Child, the story of Philomena Keller Baker, and editor of Stories of Aroostook, also released by Island Port Press in 2020. She lives in Caribou, Maine. Thank you for sharing your time and your story with our audience today, Kathryn. I know that they join me in welcoming you.
Thank you. And I so appreciate being part of this. It's wonderful. And I look forward to sharing a few ideas and to hearing what people have to say and ask, especially.
Oh, thank you. So it's our pleasure to have you with us. So I want to start out with just a couple questions for you to kind of just get the program started, and then I know you're going to share some excerpts from the book with us, and we're going to show some folks some pictures. But my first question for you this evening is: you moved to Northern Maine in the 1970s. What drew you here?
Well, there's a bit of a story. I was married to a second generation Swede at the time, and we had visited Sweden. We had traced his roots, met his relatives, and came back and settled in New Hampshire. So we, on a vacation to Quebec, we decided to return to our home in New Hampshire through Maine. And we passed a sign that said Stockholm. And then we passed another sign that said New Sweden. And by that time we said, we've just got to send your dad a postcard at least. He was a big Swede. So as things happen in Maine, when we went to the post office, we got to chatting and found out that a couple who had been classmates of my husband in Illinois were summering in Westmoreland. So we found our way to their log house where they had been traveling from Elgin, Illinois every year for a few years, and became acquainted, spent the night there, had an evening with local people who were just so welcoming and wonderful. And then the next day we took a tour of the area, and of course we were taken with the breathtaking beauty of Aroostook County. And the second chapter of that was that both Jim and I were kind of looking for a lifestyle change and hoping to get back to the land and learn to live more sustainably, be more self-sufficient. And so that had been in our minds before we found Aroostook County. And on our tours with these friends, we spotted a house that had been abandoned for 17 years and occupied only by potato pickers and porcupines. And so that became our home. And so the long story, that's the long story. I guess the short story is that first it was the Swedish community, because we had that background, or Jim had that background. And the second was the fact that it gave us an opportunity for a change in lifestyle. And the third was, of course, the beautiful place that we were able to occupy.
Nice. And I should say too, for everyone that's out there that's listening, the county is well represented in Maine Historical Society's collection and on our online database, Maine Memory Network, through the collections and the contributions of many of our partners, our partnering communities in that part of the state, places like New Sweden and Presque Isle. And I'll be sharing some examples of some of those resources with you folks in the chat when I have a chance throughout the evening. So if you're curious, be sure to take a look and you can learn a bit more about Maine Memory Network. So what led you to, now that we know a little bit more about what brought you to your home, what led you to write about your adopted home?
Well, my first job after we moved to Maine was as a correspondent for the Bangor Daily News. So it was my job. Well, my beat was typical of cops and courts and municipal government and local events, but also I could write a feature story on anything I wanted to. And so it gave me a wonderful opportunity to get acquainted with the area. Anytime I heard about something or somebody that sounded interesting, I could write a story on it and get published and get paid. I mean, like, how good is that? So that was the beginning. And then after I got divorced and needed a full-time job, I went to work for the Aroostook Republican, the weekly newspaper in Caribou. And so that carried that to a different level. The True North columns actually came later because after I retired, I kind of came full circle back to the Bangor Daily News. I was asked to write a column, and I said, well, what about? And they said, anything you want. And I said, seriously? And they said, well, no, it has to do with Aroostook County. And so I had to write about Aroostook County, but that was not a problem at all. And so most of the stories in True North are from the columns in the Bangor Daily. And there are a few from Echoes, which was not really an outlet for my own writing, but a conduit for other people to write about their experiences in rural Maine. So there are a few articles from Echoes, but most of them are from the Bangor Daily and my post-retirement job.
Very nice. What is your favorite thing about Maine?
That's a tough one. I really don't like favorites very much, but I guess for the answer to the question would have to be it's a toss-up for me between the people and the beauty. I found in Maine genuine friendliness, extreme kindness. I appreciate people's independence and their ingenuity and their work ethic and a sense of place. There's an authenticity about the people. Mm-hmm. And they share my appreciation of nature. Absolutely beautiful landscapes. I love the darkness, as you will hear in some of the essays that I quote. I love the silence. I love the safety. I know people who leave their doors unlocked, who leave the keys in their car. In fact, they say you have to leave the car running so that the battery doesn't die. So I guess that there are so many aspects of the natural setting that are important to me, and enough snow to ski into April. I've skied almost every day since Thanksgiving, and we have at least a dozen well-groomed trails within a few miles of my house. So those are my favorite things.
I really like that.
I know there's not just one.
No, but those are good answers, and I personally find them very relatable. I'm a transplant to Maine too, from other parts of New England, and had really much the same experience in terms of, what brought me here was the job I have now. But one of the things that has really kept me here and my husband here is we too were struck by just how lovely the Maine people are, how genuine, how kind, and just have found a really nice quality of life amongst our neighbors here. So I can, your answers there really ring true for me personally.
Where did you move from? Where were you from before you came
originally here? Yeah, I'm originally from Massachusetts. My husband and I came here by way of Connecticut. So is there a story or an essay from your book that you would call a favorite or one that you're especially proud of?
Well, I'm really always tickled by the stories that generate a lot of reader responses. They readers typically like ones about animals. I caught a mink in my squirrel trap, and I've had a moose walking through my yard and eating the apples and the vegetation on the apple trees. But I have to say that the one that generated the most response and was the most popular was about garden slugs. It's titled "Slugs Prefer Bud" in the book. But this was a time when I was trying to get back into gardening. I had just retired, and I decided I had to go back to this idea of self-sufficiency that drew me to Maine in the first place. So I conducted a kind of experiment. I knew that slugs were supposed to commit suicide in beer, and it turned out that I did an experiment on which beer they would most likely die for. So that and it was a long involved thing. It just sort of happened, but I recorded it, and I got dozens of responses, both by email and online to the website at the Bangor Daily News. I got a book from one of the readers, 50 Ways to Kill a Slug. There was a columnist who wrote a garden column in a newspaper in Buffalo, New York, who wrote a column about my column. But the best thing was when it became the subject for one of the limericks on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, the National Public Radio news program. And I was in Nova Scotia at Celtic Colors when this aired, but I got an email from an old college friend who lived in Tennessee who had heard it and sent me the link. So I can read you the limerick if you'd like to hear it.
Please, yeah.
Okay, now I have to check out okay. So if you don't know the program, the host reads 3 news-related limericks with the last word or phrase missing. And the person who calls in has to fill in the correct missing word or phrase in 2 of the 3 limericks to win. So this one generated, this was, the caller was from Buffalo, New York. And this was his first limerick. For Anheuser-Busch, it's a plug. Shellless mollusks consume with a glug. They think microbrews are a bit of a snooze. No, Bud is the beer for
Nice.
So then Peter Sagal, who was the host, went on to say, gardeners know slugs are attracted to beer, but only Kathryn Olmstead, a writer and professor in Maine, bothered to ask which beer they prefer. She gave her garden slugs a selection of domestic and foreign beers, and the slugs overwhelmingly chose Budweiser. True fact. Except for one of the pretentious slug who said, like, do you have any top fermented ales? And the other slugs threw him out of the frat. Whatever they drink, those slugs, the party's over as soon as they reach for the salted nuts.
Very nice. Someone's already asking in the chat, does Budweiser know about this research?
I haven't heard from them yet. I thought for sure they'd come. I heard from a distributor for Budweiser who had, without doubt, said it was because that Budweiser brews its beer with rice.
Oh, okay.
Other, the higher, more sophisticated brews use only barley, but others
okay.
with other grains. But then he said it might be the beechwood barrels that Budweiser is aged in. So it's either the rice or the beechwood barrels that draws the slugs.
That's a great story. Well, I know you've got some selections from the book that you would like to share with us tonight. And I will tell folks too, you can purchase a copy of True North from Maine Historical Society. You can come visit us in person at our Congress Street location in Portland, or you can purchase the book online, and I'll share the link to our store in the chat shortly. But Kathryn, if you're ready to do some reading, I'm gonna share my screen to share some photos that you shared with me to complement the different pieces you've selected.
Thank you. Yes, I am so grateful for you to have created the opportunity to show some of the photos in True North in color.
Yeah, they really are beautiful too.
As I begged for even one color page in True North, it was just not possible. Just the color. So now you alone, with those who are watching, will be able to see Paul Sears' stunning pictures of the night sky.
And this picture we're looking at right here, is this the cover from the book?
It was it's the picture the cover was made from. It was cropped differently so that you can see it was a little different. But this one and the other views of the night sky are all among the beautiful pictures that Paul Sear, who lives in Presque Isle, takes. So the first excerpt is actually not an excerpt. It's short enough to read the whole thing, but for the other selections, I tried to pick a few paragraphs that suggest the theme of the essay and hope that they're not so fragmented that they don't make sense. The first one is a description of perhaps 1 hour of my life when I lived on a hill in Westmanland, about 15 miles north of Caribou. The title is Alone? ? It is cold, almost midnight. I carve a chair into the snowbank beside the driveway and line it with the tough wool blanket I carry in the trunk of my car in the winter. Wrapped in my warmest down coat, I take my seat to view this evening's display of northern lights. The pulsing flares of yellow, then red, then green, in an arc across the northern sky, seem to evoke the cries of the coyotes that echo in the valley below. First one, then a chorus of barks and howls alternate in a pattern that is the perfect accompaniment to nature's performance above. Originally, I came out to look at the comet that had followed me home on the long drive north to Westmanland, drawing my attention from Interstate 95 to the darkening sky outside the left window of my car. By the time I had unloaded the car, built a fire, and returned to the yard to examine the night sky, Aurora Borealis had become the main attraction, with the comet performing a sideshow. I leaned back, arms outstretched, head resting on the snow. Diminished by their luminous competition, the stars still seem close. Everything seems close. I'm enfolded, a part of all that surrounds me. Beneath the hill that rises behind me, a fox family lives in a den with 3 entrances. We share the same trails all winter, and when spring arrives, the field beneath the snow becomes a playground for bouncing gray kits that cavort in the grass under close parental supervision. In June, moose escape into this field from the black flies in the woods, traipsing through the garden and past the house and up over the back hill into New Sweden. Once I watched a mother nurse her calf in a clearing visible from the kitchen window where I view the animals that share this land. A portrait of maternal contentment for perhaps half an hour. Suddenly, she stiffened and led her baby gracefully across the hill back into the woods. The next time I looked out the window, a black bear was grazing in the clearing. Seated at the base of the slope, I feel the chill as Aurora Borealis fades and the coyote calls cease. I roll up my blanket and head into the warmth of the fire. Sometimes people ask, how can you live up on that hill all alone? Well, it's hard to explain.
Lovely.
The next selection describes how recycling and reuse were just common sense in rural households a generation ago. Rags, rugs, and refuse. When I moved to Maine in 1974, I thought I had stepped back a generation into a time my mother used to tell me about as she recalled her childhood in rural Illinois. Only recently have my next door neighbor, Ethel Carlson, stopped weaving her own rag rugs on the Swedish loom in her corner bedroom. Once clothes were worn out, she would spend the evenings cutting them into strips and tying them together for use as the weft on the loom warped with sturdy cotton or linen string. The life of a rag rug in Ethel's house began in a bedroom or a hallway. It moved to the kitchen when it became a little worn, and then to the front or back doorway, and finally to the shed where the dog might scratch it into a bed for the night. In the days before secondhand stores and sanitary landfills, a garment was not discarded just because it was faded or torn, out of style or outgrown. It had a long tour of duty in the household. The total amount of waste leaving that household was so small it could be accommodated in a family dump someplace on the farm. What a difference a generation makes. My years as Ethel and Alvin Carlson's neighbor included a stint as editor of the weekly newspaper in Caribou. I could not help but appreciate their thrift as I observed waste disposal becoming front page news more often than any other topic. From sophisticated wastewater treatment plants to fines against potato processors for polluting the river to creation of a new tri-community landfill. Waste management was a major expense to the city and its businesses. We wrote feature stories on the city's first garbologist and on the first redemption center for bottles and cans. The idea was new to those who could not remember when milk came in bottles that were sterilized and reused by dairies and farmers. Today, more than 30 years later, we are still rediscovering what the Carlsons did instinctively. But they were poorer, some say. They had to conserve. They had no choice. Do we? The next story is an excerpt from an essay that reflecting on how I became aware of cultural heritage and came to appreciate its connection to a country. The title is Heritage Envy. Living in Aroostook County has given me a kind of heritage envy. I'm sure my ancestors had compelling narratives of the hardships they endured in coming to a strange land, but they arrived so long ago, their stories have been lost. Descendants of immigrants to Northern Maine and adjacent New Brunswick, however, know their roots, especially the Acadians and the Swedes. Tales of their migrations to the region are told and retold, strengthening cultural heritage with each retelling, affirming for each family and individual an identity in their ethnic history. My sense of separateness resurfaced when I read in a brochure that I was scheduled to talk to a downstate historical society about growing up in a Swedish community. This came as a surprise since I grew up in a non-ethnic suburb of Battle Creek, Michigan. But there it was in print for all to anticipate. Could I pull it off? Certainly I'd masqueraded as a Swede at many a midsummer festival during the 10 years I lived in Westmorland, a suburb of New Sweden, dancing in traditional costume and helping serve at smorgasbords. Maybe I should talk about how I became a pseudo Swede. Or perhaps I could interview people who did grow up in a Swedish community. Or I could relate all I'd learned about Maine's Swedish history after I was welcomed into their community as a transplant. Northern Maine's Swedish colony has one of the most well-documented migrant histories in the state, beautifully portrayed in the New Sweden Historical Museum. Residents celebrate not only the annual Midsummer Festival in June, but also the anniversary of the colony's founding in July, the pre-Christmas Santa Lucia Festival in December, and Julata on Christmas morning. These celebrations continually renew the history of the Maine colony and its traditions of the old country, educating all generations of Swedes and non-Swedes. To live in this community is to know something about Swedish culture. I was proud to don the costume of the Swedish province for which Westmoreland, Maine was named. I loved learning and performing traditional dances and speaking what few Swedish words I could with those who understood them. So while I couldn't tell the Historical Society about growing up in a Swedish community, I could certainly describe growing into one. And if anyone thinks I'm really Swedish, I'd consider it a compliment. The next excerpt requires a bit more explanation. You need to know that before the Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842 made the St. John River the boundary between Canada and the United States, the towns of Van Buren, Maine, and St. Leonard, New Brunswick, across the river, were one. It was called Grande Riviere. Family farms spanned the river, and even after the river became a boundary, the two towns retained that sense of community. They've even held two tugs of war across the river. In 2014, the St. John Valley celebrated the World Acadian Congress, attracting thousands of visitors from French-speaking countries around the world. I wanted to focus my stories for the Bangor Daily and for Echoes on how the town experienced this extraordinary event. One town, Van Buren, adopted me and saw that I was included in every part of the 17-day festival. The friendship extended to me typifies the spirit of Acadians throughout the St. John Valley. The essay is titled Feeling Acadian. I thought I understood what it meant to be Acadian, but celebrating the World Acadian Congress, Congrès Mondial Acadien, in the town of Van Buren in 2014 moved my understanding from the intellectual to the emotional and spiritual. Celebrated every 5 years in French-speaking countries around the world, the 2014 Acadian Congress was the first to be hosted by two countries, Canada and the United States, through a collaboration by the provinces of Quebec, New Brunswick, with the state of Maine. I could feel the pride among hundreds of people gathered in the gymnasium at Van Buren High School for the launch of the weeks-long festival, viewing the opening ceremonies live streamed from Quebec and projected on a big screen. I was welcomed to a table by women eager to share their secrets for variations on the ploy and cretonne included among the offerings for our hearty breakfast. Throughout the hall, people who had been punished for speaking French as children spoke their language freely and sang French songs joyfully. Music brought people together again on Saturday morning for a bilingual mass and concert by the combined choirs of Van Buren and the New Brunswick towns of St. Leonard and St. Anne. Every seat was filled in the huge Romanesque sanctuary of St. Bruno Church as songs in French rang out from the choir loft high above the congregation. The Reverend Jacques Lapointe dedicated the service to refugees around the world. Like Acadians in 1755, he said, refugees today, 2014, are being persecuted on a mountain in Iraq. We were supposed to disappear, but we survived because we reached out to others. Lapointe expressed the hope that sometime in the future, today's refugees would be able to celebrate their survival with festivities like the World Acadian Congress. To proclaim their survival, Acadians make noise. They call it a tintamar, and they march together, banging pans, blowing horns, and sounding every kind of noisemaker available to say, "We are here." I was swept into Van Buren's tintamar, marching down Main Street and across the International Bridge from Van Buren to St. Leonard, New Brunswick, where we were greeted by a cheering crowd and border officials steering us toward check-in windows. Like Mainers, New Brunswickers were decked out in Acadian red, white, blue, and yellow. They blended together, and that was the point. I was there because townspeople continued to reach out to me, demonstrating the generosity that meant survival for the Acadians in the 1700s. I will never be able to claim Acadian heritage, but I feel its strength, rooted in a history of persecution throughout the St. John Valley. I too hope that the suffering of the world's refugees today will end with a tintamar. This excerpt is a kind of bookmark to the first one, written almost 10 years later after I had moved to Caribou. It explores the negative effects of artificial light, not only on our view of the heavens, but also on our psyches. The night sky. The Big Dipper hung low over the highway in front of me as I drove north on Interstate 95. It was one of those crisp, clear evenings when the sky turns deep blue after the sunset. I couldn't wait to get to Caribou to examine the night sky from my front yard. I was not disappointed. The sky was a blanket of stars, bisected by the Milky Way, a broad swath, millions of stars in an arc over my head. Every time I experience such an evening, I am struck with wonder at the vastness of the universe and the minuteness of my place in it. I try to imagine something totally beyond my comprehension. I think about my life in a way quite different from my general focus on day-to-day activities. Observing the firmament provides a periodic perspective on existence that I find valuable. Yet in recent years, I've come to realize that I am among a dwindling number of people on the East Coast with such a pure view of the heavens. A writer for National Geographic explained, "Darkness is as essential to our biological welfare as light itself. In a very real sense, light pollution causes us to lose sight of our true place in the universe, to forget the scale of our being, which is best measured against the dimensions of deep night with the Milky Way, the edge of the galaxy, arching overhead." The first year I lived in Aroostook County, my husband and I skied from the road to our house in the winter, crossing an open field about 1/10 of a mile. One night on one of those treks, we noticed a bright band of light directly overhead, not the stars of the Milky Way, but a solid arc. An hour or so later, a call to the outhouse brought me back into the yard. The band of light had moved north and widened. As time passed, the glow became the dancing luminescence of color that we would witness time after time thereafter. Aurora Borealis. I've lived in Aroostook County long enough now that I can hardly imagine the loss I would feel if I were unable to wander out into the darkness and be so small.
Thank you so much for sharing those really lovely, really just beautiful passages from the book. And as I say, folks, I'm going to share the link where if you're interested in reading more from Kathryn's wonderful book, I'm going to share the link to where you can purchase that through the museum store. Now would be a good time if folks in our audience have questions for Kathryn. We're happy to entertain those now. I'm going to start, let's see, we're getting a couple questions. One question from Ron says, I've always been impressed with county schools, that their results have always been high. Why do you think that is? What do you think accounts for the success of the students and the schools in the county?
Well, good question. I know in the past that the schools were small up in New Sweden and Stockholm. Of course, they had close attention to the students. And I suspect it has to do with the sense of community as well as the quality of the teaching. I think there's excellent teachers. And but I think there's something to be said for a small community where people care about each other and share their values.
I think that's very true. I a couple years ago had the opportunity to visit a school in Presque Isle, to spend a couple days with them, and was impressed. I'm always impressed by the work that our teachers here in Maine do, and the folks up in Presque Isle that were no exception. Great teachers, great community, and just, yeah, a really good sense of community. One of the things that we did was I showed some students, photographs. Actually, I misspoke. This was not Presque Isle. This was in Fort Kent. And I showed some folks, the students, some photographs from Maine Memory Network of their town. And they were so delighted to look through some of the photographs and recognize family members and neighbors, and also to recognize places in their town and to talk about, oh yeah, that's where this store is now, or this is over here, or look at the way the road goes. They had a real deep sense of community, and they really loved getting a chance to see up close the history of that community, and to sort of imagine what had life, for their families been like, for their parents, their grandparents, their great grandparents. So don't forget, there's a real treasure trove of material on that part of the state on Maine Memory Network. So if you're curious to learn more, visit mainmemory.net, and you can see a lot of the wonderful contributions from our contributing partners.
Yes, and a postscript to that, one of the writers for Echoes, who has published with Island Port Press, Glenna Johnson Smith, was a teacher at Presque Isle High School. And I think she represented a kind of relationship that teachers and students have in local schools that led them to the winning the state drama one-act play festival that they have in Maine, and so I think that's part of it. People know who they are, mm-hmm. And because, as some of the things that I mentioned in the reciting of cultural history, people know where they come from, and I think that grounds them. The other thing that I remember is I had one semester at University of Maine in Orono. I had a ton of students from Aroostook County for some reason, so when they all graduated, I had them out for a picnic at my house. Nice. Together, and I recorded it, and they talked about being from the county, and the fact that they would come together and come to the house of one of their teachers. It was a good example of the kind of relationship that builds a sense of confidence, maybe, and a sense of who you are and where you're from.
Excellent. Margaret says, thank you for the lovely presentation, and is wondering what writers have inspired you?
Well, I read The New Yorker because it's such good writing. And certainly Glenna has inspired me. That's a good question. That changes from time to time. I really I read a book recently by Ann Patchett. I think she's a wonderful writer. But I don't have any particular one. But I do, when I want to get going on writing, I do read New Yorker stories because I think they are so well written.
Excellent. Rosemary says, and this is something you and I talked a little bit about when we were getting ready, is wondering if there are interesting stories behind the artwork that is behind you on the wall. Is there anything that you'd like to point out and share?
Oh, well, I must share. The biggest picture is a picture of a barn in Westmoreland that was done by my sister from a photograph, Swede, who I think is listening tonight in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The one right under that is by Heather Sienkiewicz, and I bought it at an auction that they had as a fundraiser for the Wintergreen Art Gallery in Presque Isle, and they had a number of, they did by size. I think this was a 12 by 12 or maybe a 10 by 10, but anyway, so that one, the one up above my head, above the clock, is a gathering of goddesses, because there's a group up here that used to be meeting regularly at my house. We call ourselves the goddesses, and we were, big on the full moon and all of that. So that was from one of them. The otter, my sister bought me in Alaska, because I have a fascination for otters. Let's see, what's the other one? Oh, the other one is really great, but you can't see because the reflection of my light. But it's a picture of walkers running on the road between right below my house. It's done for an auction. So you guys just can't see it, but anyway, Marty Gallant did the painting.
Very nice.
And Glenna did the little watercolor of strawberries.
Lovely. Kathryn asks, how many different places have you lived in Maine? What were some of the similarities and differences between those places?
I've lived 3 places in Maine: Westmoreland, Caribou, and Orono. And the differences, well, of course, Westmoreland is the most rural, and it's a farming community without now any really active farms, except, well, there are 2 active farms, I guess. And the interesting thing about Westmoreland is that the land patterns have remained pretty much the same, even with changes in population. And when Jim and I moved there, we thought, oh my gosh, we better enjoy this while we can, because people will be coming from the cities and changing it all. But that really hasn't happened. In fact, when it was a plantation when we moved there, and it became a town. And when it became a town, we had to have a planning board. And the planning board got together and interviewed everybody in town, because there were only 19 families. So we divided up all the families, and we went and sat at their kitchen tables and said, okay, what would you like your town to look like in 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years? So that was Westmoreland. Caribou is more urban. It's a city, still as friendly as every place in Maine is, of course. And I am fortunate to live on the Aroostook River. And Orono is a wonderful, dynamic community. I love Orono. I have wonderful friends there, and I like that I can walk everywhere. Quite different from places here. I can walk to the post office and to the store and to the university and to concerts. And so I guess to define the difference, it's being close and having my neighbors close, and enjoying that as well. So I like them all. I mean, there's no one that's any better than the other.
They're all special places. Dawn asks, have you ever written about potatoes?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, those I know that when we talk about like an important part of the community, when I visit.
Well, I was an agricultural correspondent for 2 newspapers back in the day. One was in Shawnee Mission, Kansas. I was the main correspondent for the Packer, and then I wrote for a paper in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. That was a monthly. So the Packer was a weekly. And so I called in my stories. This was before computers, and read them, and because they had to get them right away. And the other one I could send in because it was only a monthly.
Nice. Yeah, I know when I visited Fort Kent, we had to kind of plan the visit around when they would be out of school for the potato harvest, because I was visiting in the fall. And I think the original week I wanted to come, they said, oh no, that's no good because we won't be in school.
No way, yeah.
Lucy is asking, and I am going to share something with the group in the chat in a moment. Could you speak to the audience about the community spirit and involvement that went into Echoes magazine? Could you talk a little bit about Echoes? And I will share, folks, that link you gave me where they can see editions online.
Mm-hmm. Well, the community spirit of Echoes takes different levels. First is the writers. The writers were the readers in a way, and when we first started it, we thought, well, we'll just do the best writing we can possibly get, and then we got stories that were really great stories, and so we worked to create the sense of what the values of rural culture were. And as that magazine evolved, it became a community in itself. And the readers and the writers communicated with each other through the magazine. And we had readers in all states of the Union at one point. And we had, at one point we had about 6,000 subscriptions. And so that was one way in which there was a sense of community, was just the fact that people came together on the pages of the magazine to share their stories and their sense of the value of living in a small community. And then the other more tangible area of community spirit was when we produced the magazine. We had a collection of people, about a dozen to 14 at a time, who would come to my house where a magazine was headquartered to stuff the magazine, and we call it stuffing parties. And the stuffing involves two or three things. One is you stuff the remittance envelope into the magazine, and then you stuff the magazine into the mailing envelope, and then you stuff the mailing envelopes into the bags that go to the post office. So these were a collection of men and women who would come together only to do this, and they saved us tons of money. I mean, because we would have to hire out to get this magazine distributed, but they wanted to do it. And I said, well, we should probably hire this out and grow up and be a real magazine. No, they said, we want to do this. We look forward to getting together. They brought all kinds of food and sweets and soups and things that the lunches were a big part of it. But it was a real idea of, there was a real sense of community within, just around the dining room table. And of course we had people spread out all over the house with these magazines, sending out maybe 300 bags full of magazines across the country. So I don't know if that's what Lucy was looking for, but there were the two things. One was the content of the magazine itself generated a kind of community that went across the country and outside the country. And then the kind of community that people came together in order to put the magazine in the mail.
And that link is in the chat, folks, to Echoes of Maine. It's www.echoesofmaine.net. And I also shared the link to the Facebook page for True North in Kathryn's other book, Flight to Freedom. You can find that link to the Facebook page in the chat too. So I want to thank you so much, Kathryn, again, for sharing some time with us this evening, sharing some lovely stories, images, excerpts from the book. It's really been a very nice way to spend kind of a cozy winter evening in the dark. And
well, thank you for making it possible. I'm just delighted that you would do it. And to say something about that website is, as I mentioned to you, we hope that it will become a research tool. I've worked with the web manager to get the table of contents and the covers of all the issues, all 117 issues up there. And we are hoping to get a cumulative index that will enable it to be searchable through subject of the story, the author of the story, and all the photographs by subject. So stay tuned. But in any event, if anybody wants a copy of the magazine, they can get it from the website, and as well as find out what's in the ones, whether they want them or not. So thanks.
Excellent. Well, and just a reminder, folks, too, the book is True North. You can purchase the book through Maine Historical Society at mainhistorystore.com. You can learn more about Maine history and see more images and learn more of the history of not only Aroostook County, but all parts of Maine when you visit our database, Maine Memory Network at mainmemory.net. And you can learn more about Maine Historical Society, see recordings of past programs, learn about our upcoming programs, how you can become a member, how you can do research with us when you visit mainhistory.org. Thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you, Kathryn, and I hope we'll see everyone back for another program soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.